In the small town of Alderbrook, nestled deep within the forested hills, there stood a house at the edge of the woods. The house was old, its wooden beams creaking under the weight of countless winters. Its windows, framed by ivy and moss, looked out over a landscape that seemed untouched by time. This house, known to the townsfolk as Holloway House, had a reputation that was as old as the town itself. The legend of Holloway House was well known among the people of Alderbrook. They whispered about it in hushed tones, especially during the long, dark winters when the wind howled through the trees like a lost soul. It was said that the house was cursed, that its original owner, a reclusive man named Thomas Holloway, had dabbled in dark magic. When he disappeared without a trace one stormy night, the townsfolk believed that something sinister had claimed him. Since then, no one dared to live in Holloway House, and it had stood empty for decades, slowly falling into ruin. But not everyone believed in the curse. Elise Hartley, a young woman who had recently moved to Alderbrook, was intrigued by the stories surrounding the old house. She was a writer, always on the lookout for inspiration, and the idea of a cursed house at the edge of a dark forest was too tempting to resist. She decided that she would visit Holloway House and see it for herself, convinced that there was a story waiting to be uncovered. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elise set out for the house. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape as she made her way through the woods. The air was thick with the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth, and the only sound was the crunch of her boots on the forest floor. As she approached the house, she felt a strange unease settle over her, but she pushed it aside, determined to see her adventure through. Holloway House was even more imposing up close. Its windows were dark, like empty eyes staring out at the world, and the front door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. Elise hesitated for a moment, but then she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior of the house was just as she had imagined: dusty, abandoned, and eerily quiet. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and cobwebs hung from the corners of the ceiling. A grand staircase led to the second floor, its banister worn smooth by years of use. As she wandered through the rooms, Elise could almost hear the echoes of the past, the laughter of children, the crackle of a fire in the hearth. But there was something else, something that made her skin prickle with unease. It was a feeling, as if she were being watched, as if there were eyes on her from the shadows. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. She was alone, after all. There was no one here but her. She made her way to the second floor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The upper rooms were much the same as those below, filled with dust and decay. But as she entered the last room at the end of the hall, she noticed something strange. The window in this room was open, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. She could have sworn all the windows had been closed when she arrived. Elise walked over to the window and looked out. The view was breathtaking. The sun was setting, casting the forest in a golden light. But then she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the reflection of the window, she saw a shadow, a tall, dark figure standing just behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty. Her heart pounding, Elise backed away from the window. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, that the stories she'd heard had gotten to her. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. The feeling of being watched had grown stronger, and she couldn't shake the sense that she was not alone. She left the room quickly, her footsteps now hurried and uneven. As she descended the stairs, she heard something that stopped her in her tracks, a soft, shuffling sound coming from the room at the back of the house. She froze, listening. The sound came again, closer this time, like footsteps on the wooden floor.